Good morning, Barry Bryson. Thanking you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're concluding our study of the book of Titus today as part of our greater series, Neglected Books of the Old Testament. And when we're together again, we're going to begin a study of the book of Philemon. If you'd like to read that book, very important study. This is so rich in meaning. And Titus is not just plowing the same field as 1st or 2nd Timothy. Titus we called a pastoral epistle. In fact, the one true pastoral epistle in the New Testament, because I think of Timothy, 1st and 2nd Timothy, as paternal epistles. Both of these, all three of these epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, are written to young men who have spent their lives as missionaries with Paul, but who are now involved in local work. And so this is a change in paradigm. And Paul is talking them through what it means to be a local minister. And so for me, it's a particularly necessary text of Scripture. These three books are. And Titus is especially important to me for many of the reasons that I've mentioned as we've studied this book. Just some things we've talked about in Titus that makes it a little bit different from Timothy. Paul seems to have, I don't want to phrase this in a bad way. There's a level of affection, of fatherly affection, that Paul has with Timothy that he does not have for Titus. It doesn't mean he doesn't love him, doesn't call him his son, because he does. But there's just a different level of connection, of intimacy between Paul and Timothy than is there with Paul and Titus. Conversely, Paul is much more worried about Timothy and about his ability to conduct himself the way he needs to as a local minister at Ephesus than he has for Titus. He has, I think, much more confidence in Titus to get the job done without extra fatherly advice than he does in Timothy, because we don't have any of those expressions that I'm worried for you. You need to remember this. What he is with Titus is completely honest about the people among whom he's working. And those are difficult verses in chapter 1 when he talks about how completely jaded and polluted the culture is that Titus finds himself in there on Crete. We talked about, and Paul mentions Epimenides, one of Crete's own writers, talking about it. And we talked about other extra biblical sources saying the same thing Paul says. And he says, these are the people that you're working around. You need to know that. That means you need to emphasize certain things, like living like you have some sense in this world. And we saw the word sensible being the theme word for human relationships, and the way submission is in Paul's other writings, and in Timothy and in Ephesians and in Colossians. Submission is the key word. In 1 Peter, submission is the key word. It's also used here in Titus as well. But the key word is sensible, to live like you've got some sense, from that Greek word sophrona, which means to exercise wisdom, to act like you've learned something in your life, that you're thinking things through, in other words. And that's the thing he needs to emphasize. We also saw that he began by saying you need to emphasize the story of Jesus, the gospel story, the simple gospel. Don't depart from that. And he ended by saying, don't you be chasing down rabbit holes. You refuse to let people draw you into ridiculous discussions about things. You stick to what you know clearly from the gospel. So that's such an important lesson that we learned. We noticed this thing that he does where he mentions 2 of 3 things. And it's a mystery why he does that. There are so many threes that we get used to reading: Father, Son, and Spirit, faith, hope, and love. The people who work in a local congregation that Paul talks about in so many other places, the elders, deacons, and the minister. He gives us the elders and the minister, but then not the deacons. He says over and over again, Father and Son, and equates the Father and the Son both as God. But he doesn't say the Spirit until chapter 3. Faith and hope, faith and hope, faith and hope. But he doesn't say love until the very last verse. Why does he do that? I don't know. He mentions 2 and not 3 of the words used for elder in the New Testament. Though, to be fair, there's only one passage that includes all 3, and that's in 1 Peter chapter 5, which we've mentioned not too many days ago when we were studying the life and letters of the Apostle Peter. There's a frankness, really, just a matter of fact frankness with Titus that we appreciate. And there's also the things that he's emphasized with Timothy, that he's emphasizing with Titus. We were just as bad as they were. Don't forget how bad you were, how bad I was, and how we all received the grace of God. And don't forget who you are. You speak boldly, and don't let anyone disregard you as God's spokesman, as God's custodian of the word. However, don't forget that you're their servant. You are their servant. I'm a servant. Paul, a bond servant of Jesus Christ. I'm a servant. You're a servant. You serve them. You're not the head honcho of that church. All those things are so important for us to remember, and they're emphasized so clearly in the book of Titus. We learned a good bit about the way Paul ran his ministry in the last 4 or 5 verses. Anyway, thank you for indulging me in my study of this book that means so much to me. And next time we're together, we're going to pick up with the book of Philemon.